live? I think we're live. All right.
We are.
So the time has come. It's been like 3 weeks since Apple Music dropped their top 100 list, albums of all time. I was disappointed.
Yeah.
Initially, I was pretty disappointed. I think it's outdated. The whole list.
A little bit. You know, we talked about it a little bit in class. I need to be honest about it. It's not like I've heard every single one, right?
Yeah.
And I want to try to. I want to get to know them all better. Maybe hate a little more appropriately. But in general, I agree with you. There's a little bit of disappointment with this list.
I've definitely. Having looked out over 3 or 4 times, I'm thinking a lot more that I should have been a little bit more open-minded going in, because I was my knee-jerk reaction was so strong when I first saw it, but then I think that I just don't agree with the criteria.
That's true,
list,
and it is also a little vague.
Yeah,
so.
But I understand why Apple Music did that, because again, music is subjective.
Certainly.
But anyways, I think that there are several albums of the multitude of albums in the world that should have made the list, but there is one elephant in the room that cannot go without being said. To Pimp a Butterfly by Kendrick Lamar has been snubbed. I don't and we've said this countless times. What needs to be said about this album?
It's true.
That it's possibly one of the most influential albums, combining more than just hip hop, more than just jazz, more than just spoken word poetry. It's a concept album. It's well-rounded. It easily could be placed in the top 5.
It's true. And all I want to say in addition to that is, leading up to the reveal of the top 10, when Apple Music sort of got at the idea that Good Kid, Mad City was going to be in there, the discourse was, wow, Kendrick's going to have 2 in the top 10.
Yeah.
That is how obvious it seemed to everyone. And that's not.
Good Kid, Mad City, I love it.
Yep.
But just seeing it chosen over To Pimp a Butterfly is definitely it's a shock.
It's a choice.
It's a choice. I know it's a lot of people's favorite though, so I can't. And again, it's Kendrick's work. You can't hate on it all too much.
That's totally true.
All right, now I'm here for my take, my actual take. I think that the album that I wanted to see on the list, or the album, there are a lot of albums I wanted to see on the list initially, and I think that because we're filming this sometime afterward, as I've had time to digest the list and go back and listen to a couple albums, Plastic Beach by Gorillaz is it's just far enough out there into the experimental that I think it deserves a spot. And I understand why it's not on the list. It's a give and take, but the main reason I think it should be on the list is because of its experimentalness in not only just production, but sort of mashing together new wave and synth pop, and then with several collaborations throwing in hip hop.
Yeah.
It just doesn't. There hasn't been a lot of, and Gorillaz itself being a conduit for a lot of creative collaboration from Damon Albarn and many others. I think that there hasn't been an album since that's had just as much creative collaboration with every artist bringing in more than just lyrics or more than just a little bit of production.
Totally.
Contributing to a bigger album.
To the full curation. Yeah, 100%. My albums that should have been on this list, I do have a couple of them as well. First and foremost, I'm going with After Hours by The Weeknd. 2020 album by The Weeknd. Lot to love about this album. Kind of a return for The Weeknd.
Yeah.
Gone for a little bit, and then we got those singles of Blinding Lights, which is obviously one of the biggest songs of all time, and Heartless. And I think the differences in those two singles really demonstrate the differences in the two halves of the album. I think it's an album that's a double album in a shorter length of time than the average double album. Kind of what you said about Gorillaz, I like that it just has so many themes. I like that it has the hip hop themes and the R&B themes, but it also has the synth pop themes. All combined into one. And I thought this list was kind of weird about R&B in general. And The Weeknd not being on the list is just one demonstration of that. So that's one album that I definitely think was left out. And then the second album that came to mind for me, kind of like you said, after some weeks of thinking about it, because, and I'm sure you're the same way, I watched a bunch of videos. I watched a bunch of conversation about this.
A bunch of haters.
Certainly. I heard everything everyone else had to say about like what got left off. And the one name I have yet to hear, and so I want to bring it up, is Phoebe Bridgers. Specifically, my pick would be Stranger in the Alps as an album that certainly could have been on this list and wasn't. Just a beautifully produced indie album with a lot of difficult themes and some songs that are really career defining, like Motion Sickness and Scott Street. And like looking at those songs and realizing they're on an album with very few, if any, flaws, but that album's not top 100 of all time. That doesn't exactly sit right with me. So those are my two picks for albums that could have been on this list.
I think for Stranger in the Alps especially, and having like, we keep going back to like this time, and especially for that album, I think that Stranger in the Alps specifically brought a more especially Phoebe Bridgers and Boy Genius. But they're bringing bluegrass in indie, which is a very like old and well-regarded genre. But to fit with this list, those genres are not appearing.
Not enough.
Music that is very heavily influenced and influential I just felt wasn't represented nearly enough.
No, I see that for sure.
So to move on, now there are albums that I wanted to be on the list, but I think there are albums that are far too high, and there are even some albums that shouldn't be on the list.
We don't have to take it to there, I guess.
But to start it off, I would this is a little bit in the moment, but I do think that When We All Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go might not deserve a spot.
It's a tough
at this
call.
point. And being ranked number 30, especially because we were having this discussion earlier today about Billy's new album.
Crazy.
Which is such
incredible.
Which is such an like you said, a career-defining piece. I just think that When We All Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go, within the context of Billy's career thus far, just doesn't hold water, and I don't think it will hold water in 5 years. Whereas her new, like even her sophomore album, I think will be regarded as sort of bringing her pop career into a more emotional and mature synth pop sort of mood. And it just makes me mad to see it above albums like Are You Experienced and Enter and Illmatic.
That's always going to be the conversation. Like if that's there's 70 albums and also all the ones not on the list that it's better than, that's a tough one.
And but at the end of the day, I don't really think that that's a hot take. I think that a lot of people would agree in that Billie Eilish, while being a very groundbreaking and influential artist, had a kind of, I don't want to say controversial because I know that's not the right word, but it was definitely the beginning of her career was definitely in the heat of the age of the internet and was definitely like defined by shock value. And I think that played into the direction of a lot of her music videos. And so I just think that When We All Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go, being the beginning of her career, doesn't do her justice. and
Yeah.
giving her this accolade of being on the top 100 for it just doesn't truly represent how she is as an artist.
As an artist.
Now to a hot take. I'm coming for the podium. Abbey Road by the Beatles is top 10. I'll put it in the top 10.
You can get some teachers on you about this, by
Yeah,
the way.
yeah. I'll get some. No, the senior center is not gonna like this.
Don't
take.
do that. Don't do that.
But and I will say there's great cuts. I mean, I Want You is possibly one of my favorite Beatles songs.
Sure.
With it opening with this like astoundingly large riff, and these talking guitars, and then going into this sort of bossa nova jazz
Yeah.
type interlude in the middle. It's really great. And of course there's cuts like Come Together, like all these iconic songs.
Right.
But the thing is that it's the Beatles. You're gonna get that on every album. They're the biggest band of all time.
Totally.
Don't come for me for that one. But I think that, again, within the context of music of the time and with the context of the Beatles weren't doing the experimentation they had been on Sgt. Pepper's, and they were not at the songwriting ability that they had on Get Back.
Sure.
So I just think that putting it at number 3 sort of, it just doesn't sit right, because it's not an album that feels as accomplished or as like groundbreaking as the other ones. Then again, it was a very weird time for the band. You know,
Sure.
It was a very transitional period. A lot of the members were sort of feeling that tension, and though that's what I think drove them in the later parts of the band to be a much greater collective,
Yeah.
I think we definitely feel how uncomfortable it is on this album.
Sure.
And let me just draw this comparison. Octopus's Garden on Abbey Road is Barry Bonds on Graduation.
I'm not here to.
It's a miss. It's Drunken Hot Girls. Like, it's just a miss.
Yeah.
That's all I have to say about that.
And again, you're going to get hate. You're
Yeah.
going to get hate. But at the same time, how founded is the hate when you consider that? You can tell me if I'm wrong about this, because I'm not the most informed Beatles fan. But you're going to get hate when you consider the fact that the average Beatles fan probably doesn't even pick it as their favorite Beatles album.
Yeah.
Like, if you are a Beatles fan that has heard all of the Beatles albums, it's probably not your favorite.
Yeah.
And so, despite the hate, I see where you're coming from with it being so high.
Yeah.
Me, so a couple of albums that I think were too high, and if we're talking about hot takes, I've got nothing but them on this topic. I'm hoping to not make any enemies with my selections, and I almost want to introduce them together because I kind of have the same thoughts on them and why I'm upset with how high they are. So I will. The two albums that I think are a little bit too high here are 1989 Taylor's Version by Taylor Swift, which they put at 18, and Blonde by Frank Ocean, which they put at 5, and you might have higher. Blonde by Frank Ocean, which they put at 5. So, again, I have a lot of similarities in how I feel about these two albums. One of the huge similarities being, love both of these artists. Absolutely not me saying I don't like Frank Ocean, not me saying I don't like Taylor Swift. I like both of them a lot. Taylor Swift being one of my favorite artists, actually, perennially in my Spotify Wrapped as one of my top 5 artists, one of the only ones to be there year after year, right? But again, my problem is the same for the both of these artists, that I think they had better albums, and even though not every single artist was held to the rule of one album on the list, these artists were. And for Frank Ocean, I would have chosen Channel Orange. For Taylor Swift, I would have chosen, the list is long, I would have chosen Folklore, I would have chosen Evermore, I would have chosen Red Taylor's Version with amazing vault tracks. I would have chosen Speak Now Taylor's Version, which is an incredible remaster. And maybe even Lover, which is another pop album.
Yeah.
Like 1989 gets this acclaim for being such a huge pop album in the modern era, when Lover might be a little bit better.
Yeah.
So like when you think about all of those factors and the fact that they have better works, it's crazy that these are this high.
Yeah.
I mentioned that the list is also weird about R&B. Like Blonde is at 5, but Confessions is at 95. 90 spots between those, weird to me. And Taylor also, just a little bit out of place. I think she has maybe a top 30 album of all time in one of those that I mentioned, but 1989 being only 2 above Joni Mitchell,
Yeah.
Blue.
Yeah.
Like if you're considering songwriting, that's another moment that it's like it's weird.
Yeah. And there's definitely like, and I think that when you're viewing the list, like that plays a part in it, is that it's just like you're given this bunch of information, and like I'm seeing all these albums that are in the wrong spots, and it's just a bunch of whiplash.
Yes, yes.
And I think what you'd said earlier about how, in comparison to a lot of Taylor's other work, 1989 just might not measure up.
Yeah.
And that's the I think that that's the problem with how this list came out, is that there are too many artists that are too great.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that there's too many artists that deserved more than one spot.
Sure. Yeah.
And
100's not enough spots.
yeah,
you know?
exactly. And there's never going to be enough spots. Yeah, I think we do have to move on.
Okay,
just a
let's do
little
that.
bit
No,
for time.
100%, 100%.
Because we have to move on to the albums that we think are ranked far too low.
Okay.
And there's, I mean, again, with albums that I think should have made the list, my list of albums that I think are ranked too low could go on forever.
Of course.
Because I don't want to get too hate, but I'll just move on. I think I'm moving into genres that I think are genres, even probably one of the largest genres, like rock, as well as you can make a case for all genres, but
Sure.
rock itself was in a weird spot on this list.
Kind of.
And I think that shows through with Are You Experienced?
Yeah.
I mean, being at number 63.
63.
Which it just gives me it gives me a little bit of whiplash. I mean, it's widely regarded as one of the most groundbreaking albums for the time. Jimi Hendrix was realized at this point as this innovator, as a guitar god.
We didn't know guitars could sound like that.
Yeah, exactly,
You know?
exactly. And though I understand how from like, maybe it's not the greatest mixed album of all time.
Sure.
Maybe this subject matter is a little funny, but that's not what people were going to see Jimi Hendrix for.
No.
People were seeing him because he was a master of his craft. And I think that I can tie this back to Pimp a Butterfly, is because when you're listening to Pimp a Butterfly, you're seeing Kendrick at his best. You're seeing Kendrick in a space that he feels comfortable, and you're seeing him do work that he is proud of.
Yes.
And that's what Are You Experienced is. It's the work of a master creating a masterpiece. And though had Jimi Hendrix's career been longer, I think he would have far surpassed Are You Experienced.
Sure.
I think that its spot at 63 far underplays its influence on My Other Take, which is Master of Puppets by Metallica.
Yeah.
Which is placed below Are You Experienced, which good, but
That's
also
okay.
still far too low.
Yes.
And Master of Puppets is, in my opinion, Metallica's best album. With very, and this is where it draws contrast to Are You Experienced, is that Master of Puppets is probably one of the greatest mixed albums I've ever listened to. It's, I believe that it's just about an hour long, and it feels cohesive. I have the CD in my car, and so I've listened to this album as a whole. probably too many times. But I can say with confidence that I've never gotten sick of it.
Yeah.
I would like to call these types of albums, and when you're at the end of a 3-album run, they're kind of just short of a magnum opus.
Mm-hmm.
They're what seems to be unnatural perfection from an artist. And I think that this shines through in cuts like Orion, which is a down-tempo piece for the most part, featuring these very melodic guitar harmonies and very ripping bass solos. And it's just, when you listen to it and you listen to it in the context of the time it was released, you're listening to an album that is out of place. It's very ahead of its time.
Yeah.
And so I think, far too low at number 69. I think that it easily could have broken the top 50. And I think OK Computer and a lot of Radiohead albums, though being far removed
Yeah.
in terms of mixing, mastering, and overall sonically, could not be in the spot that they are without Master of Puppets.
I completely agree with that. I mean, you keep bringing the word influence, and it has to play a role. Even if it's not the top 100 most influential albums list, which is what I hear a lot of when I try to talk about this, it's still a part of picking the placement of the album.
Because when you're looking at albums of all time, you're looking at albums of all time, which means that you're looking at them on a linear scale with a timeline.
Certainly.
And so if I'm looking at Are You Experienced here, and I'm looking at Master of Puppets here, and then OK Computers all the way over here, I'm just not really connecting the dots with
Right. Yeah.
And on to you.
Yeah, I did go kind of a different way about this. We talked about the different ways that we thought about what it meant for an album to be too low. You picked a couple that are in the back half of the list. I have a couple in the front half of the list. A couple that, for those that don't know, Apple Music was releasing this list in pieces, right? 10 at a time at first. And these were the albums that appeared on my timeline earlier than I expected. Even though they were high in the list, I couldn't believe that they were as low on the list as they were. The first of which was number 39, Illmatic, which we've already brought up since we started talking. Illmatic by Nas is in the conversation of best hip-hop album of all time. I'm not saying that it is, but it's in the conversation, and there are a large number of hip-hop albums above it on this list. So 39 I thought was way too low. I think it's top 10. I think that, especially when you consider how young Nas was when he was recording it, I think he was 19, maybe going on about to be 20, and yet he still had such a great view of exactly what life was to him. It feels like, I didn't exactly live in New York at the time of this album being out, but I feel like I learned a lot about what living in New York was like in the time of this album being out just by listening to it. And similar to you mentioned the CD. I have it on vinyl. I listen to it all the time still. So much to glean from it to this day. My other pick is my favorite album of all time, which I may be fortunate. I don't think everybody got their favorite album on this list. My favorite album of all time is Rumors by Fleetwood Mac, number 11. A lot of people would say that's a great ranking. It should be number 1. I will always say this. I think it is 10 songs of perfection. They had 11, but they got cut down to 10 because of the fact that they were putting it on vinyls at the time and there was no streaming services. And so when you consider how perfect it is, how it could be a greatest hits album and nobody would bat an eye at the fact that it's a greatest hits album, beautifully produced, incredible stories behind the time it was being recorded. There are documentaries about it. Rumors at 11. Happy it's not lower. Should be number 1 is my take.
And on that number 1 take, for the sake of time,
sure.
I do have to just leave my remarks. I believe that the number 1 spot should go to the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill.
Yeah.
Like you said about Illmatic, it captures the world around Lauryn Hill so effectively in a way that I don't think maybe could be captured on any other album.
Sure.
But definitely isn't expressed in the same way. And it's very mature and very deserving of its spot. And unfortunately, we are out of time
It's all good.
for this episode.
Yeah,
But it was a pleasure having you on the show.
I had a great time.
And who knows? Maybe there'll be more. Maybe I'm hoping that Spotify and
Fights back.
yeah, they may drop their own top 100 album. Hey, maybe we'll get a SoundCloud top 100.
That would be
Have
kinda cool.
Have a little bit of Smoke Perp or Lil Uzi Vert on top 10.
Sure.
But that is all the time we have for today. Like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below. What do you think about the list? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? And yeah, tune in whenever there's another episode. Whenever we do this again. See you guys later.